Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Before I get started this week, I want to give a shout out to PC Clone from YouTube. He gave me a very generous donation of 1 billion ISK. Thank you very much for that. All that ISK is going to go towards fuel purchases for these structures in detail. So he's basically sponsoring us for, how long would that be? That's actually like, I think, several months of fuel for me. So very, very generous donation. Thank you very much for that. Another thing that I quickly wanted to talk about before we get started are the chat windows above. I do like them in EVE Talk, but of course what I would like to have are some very active chat windows. And EVE Radio, EVE University, those chat windows don't seem to be all that active all the time. Locally is great, of course. In Jita helped as well. And then recruitment, I think, can be very cool too. So if you have suggestions for these chat windows, or if you want one of your own chat windows to be shown on EVE Talk for a couple of weeks, just put them down in the comments or send me an EVE mail in game and I'll look into it. Perhaps I might switch it up a little bit, especially the slots here, EVE University and EVE Radio. I'd say those are open for some fresh new content when it comes to the chat windows in EVE Talk. Of course, we are here for the market, so let's get this party started. This one is at 140 for plex and stuff. Let's make it 145. 45, I like that. And we can see in Jita itself that plex have gone down a little bit, 3,264,000 ISK now. That's down a little bit from last week. If we take the filter out, they don't move that much anymore. On the current phase of the plex prices, 3,214,000 ISK in the player owned trade hubs. Buyers coming in at 3,173,000 in Jita and at 3,174 in the player trade hub. So very narrow margin, very narrow differences between the Jita 4.4 station and the player owned trade hubs. And we can see here an extremely flat plex price chart at the moment. So I would say we're still in the wait and see situation, which I think, considering last week, is no surprise. Basically, we didn't really get any feedback or a lot of news from CCP. I did pick up at some point, I think it was 2 weeks ago already, that CCP did listen a lot to the feedback on the structure changes, and they're not going to give the GTFO module to structures, and they're also not going to add the fitting timer, which would allow you to defend a completely fitted structure right off the bat. And so that, I think, would have given offensive uses of the structures into hostile territory too much of an advantage. And so they listened to us, and that is going to change as well. But other than that, it's still remarkably silent on the development plans that CCP has for EVE Online. Next to plex, let's take a look at the multiple pilot training certificate. Here I'm actually starting to see the pattern of this coming in line with plex once again. So most of these sharp drops are due to specific plex for the multiple pilot training certificates. They're now selling for around 1.3 billion on average, 1,348 million for the sellers, 1,130 million for the buyers. Surprisingly large margin here, in my opinion. But we can see that volatility is decreasing and that we're basically settling at the 1.3 billion chart. If for the upcoming weeks plex stay flat, then I think this is just going to flatten out at the current trade range as well. Next up, we've got the skill extractors, of course, very closely tied to plex. Here, the slight little tick here, probably an individual sale or something like that. It happens from time to time, or somebody made a bigger move. I think during this higher volume period here, that was quite intense apparently, CCP did make a special sale. I'm not 100% sure, but I do strongly remember, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, that CCP came out with something for skill extractors. Hardly moves on the chart, so there's lots of inertia here, probably due to the very strong tie with plex. These are currently selling for 361 million ISK. Buyers are coming in at 356 million ISK. Again, very narrow margin on a very flat chart. Next up, we've got some large scale injectors. Let's start with these. These are finally starting to show the same pattern as well. So I would say, considering that plex have basically been flat since January, and the large scale injectors have actually, well, also been flat in since January, this is set to continue. What does show a strong demand for skill points is the fact that while plex had a little bit of a contraction right before this period, the large scale injectors actually increased in price and are settling at a 1-year high price point of more than 800 million. This is actually quite expensive. 815 million for the sellers, 797 for the buyers. I think last week we were still at 801 million or something like that. So the pressure is starting to show here on the large scale injectors as well, but it still shows very strong demand for skill points and for the skill injectors for that reason, because you would expect actually a little bit of a drop from here. Maybe a bubble and then a little bit of a drop from here, and I would say around 750 million if you would have a one-on-one correlation with what was happening with plex prices. But we got the exact opposite, continued to push through up until January, and here is where we start to be flat, but at the 1-year high prices. So quite interesting in my opinion, and definitely one of those interesting barometers for what's happening in the game. The small scale injectors, then this chart is finally starting to be somewhat workable. They've only been introduced in May, mid-May. You can see that here from the start of the chart. But the patterns are starting to show, and here we do have an extremely large spike up to 170 million in August. This is probably because of the newness, that there was more volatility in the small scale injectors, but after that the patterns are starting to be very closely tied to the large scale injectors, which is normal, considering of course that you basically split large scale injectors into small scale injectors. And as a result we are settling here at 170 million ISK, and also at a very high price, with that same increase in price up until January, and then a starting of the flattening out of the chart. So these are selling for 165 million ISK. Decently expensive of course, but this is something that I think is a goal that an alpha clone can still set for himself very easily, especially with exploration on one good evening with a couple of good combat sites, for instance, or a good dive in a nice wormhole with a couple of relic and data sites can actually yield you this kind of money. So doing this on maybe a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, I think is actually very manageable. Compare that to the large scale injectors for 800 million ISK. That's quite a different story. You would, you know, sometimes you'd need like a whole month, I think, as an alpha clone character to net you that kind of profit. So I think that the small scale injectors does make things more accessible for alpha clones. The fact that the pattern has been showing up now in the same way as the large scale injectors, that we're also at this high price point of 170 million ISK, I think means to me that things have balanced out quite nicely. The demand for skill points exists in both veteran players and in alpha clones. The daily alpha injectors next, those are a little bit too new to really show any patterns. They basically very flat as well. Slight downtrend from 660 million ISK down to 59 million ISK for the sellers, 55.7 for the buyers. So what we do notice here, very tiny margin. Lots of them have been flat for about a month, and I think a lot of that is tied to the very stable plex prices at the moment. And that's it, we've been through all of them, so we're moving on to some minerals at 910. There we go. And this could get very interesting if you've taken a look at the ticker down below. Megasite's been doing some crazy stuff, but let's start as always with Tritanium, that is trying to hold on but is having a really hard time doing so. So the chart went up to 5.5 ISK. We're going down a little bit from that. At least I think we're still selling for more than 5 ISK. So let's bring the filter back to Cheetah Station. 555 for the first seller, 558, a couple of them coming in here, and the buyers at 533. I would say margin is going back up a little bit, and the buyers want to get that price down. Oh, which by the way, I wanted to mention this as well. Large scale injectors, buyers coming in at less than 800 million ISK. So that is a sign that people are trying to push the price of the skill injectors back down a little bit. And the longer all of this continues, the more supply keeps coming in. At some point, it might drive the sellers to go to that price, and then of course we could actually start to see a serious correction. But I would say that we would need to see sellers forced down below 800 million ISK as well before there's any real chance for that. Back to titanium. So here obviously under pressure from all of the supply, almost a billion, more than half a billion, several hundred million coming in again as well. So it's still a lot of supply. The buyers are well, 500 million units are being bought from time to time at 526, 527. It's decently reasonable, but of course after an increase in price that was very nice and very welcome for miners from 4.5 to 5.5 ISK, there is a bit of a correction now with the slowing down of action in nullsec, of course. Let's take a look at pyrite next. To my surprise, managed to do a bit of like a late jump up. So titanium started that right before January. Pyrite started that a little bit later, 2-3 weeks later, and went above 5 ISK. Tried to get to 5.5, but really never managed that. And now unfortunately median daily prices back below 5 ISK. So again under pressure as well, 496 for the sellers and still 700 million units coming in here. Buyers are at 475, driving the price back down. Once again, we're not at the very low point. That was around 4.5 ISK on average. Crazy low for pyrite, but we can see that at this point the pattern is very clear. It's nullsec that is driving lots of the supply. It may not all come from the Imperium, but nullsec is definitely driving lots of the supplies, because when the Imperium went to war, when there was actual action and destruction there, that is when things switched it up. The market switched it up and we actually got this increase in price. So let's hope that there will be more conflict there. That would be very good news for the high-sec miners. After pyrite, we take a look at Mexalon, and that was actually the big winner of, you could say, the Imperium deployment, with an early start of increase in price. Actually already in December went up from 65 ISK to a high point of almost 85 ISK. Definitely pretty good. Just like titanium though, at the tail end we have to give back a little bit of ground. Sellers though are still at 82.23, so they're still trying to get more than 80 ISK for their Mexalon. That won't last for too long, I don't think, with buyers coming in at 77.96. That pressure is on any fresh supply. Anyone that is looking to unload big numbers of Mexalon at these really good prices, it must be said, will of course keep driving the price back down. And I do think that will, considering the rest of the chart, that we're very likely to break through 80 and settle maybe at around 75 or something like that eventually, on a slower period in nullsec. So this one though, still even historically speaking, at a really good price, 1 year high point as well, very close to that. And so if you're mining even in high sec, again, focus on the Mexalon sources, because that's where you're gonna get more ISK per hour from. Next up we've got Isogen, and Isogen went up in price towards 43 ISK after reaching a 1 year low of 38 on the chart, so extremely bad. One thing that you should note though is that we're actually settling here at 43. It's the very same pattern as Pyrite, except Pyrite is going down, broke back through the 5 ISK barrier, and Isogen is actually holding a little bit stronger. And on this one I actually got a viewer tip that I definitely want to share with you guys. Very interesting stuff. Sellers at 44 ISK, buyers at 41.97, and these buy orders, as you can see here, are actually decently recent. And so what that viewer noticed was that the new structure fighters, so there will be specific fighters that are more powerful than the base versions, that will only be usable in structures, because those don't get the carrier bonuses anymore. And they cost an extremely large amount of Isogen, and so he warned me about that. And I think that this is definitely one of the ways that CCP tries to have a little bit of an influence to bring some balance, but also some change in the meta, in the market itself. That is, of course, by introducing new goods and items into the game, and then they can tweak the the industrial cost of those items in order to try and get a certain result. And here what he really noticed was that there's a lot of isogen needed for those new fighters. So there's lots of structures in nullsec. Fighters are probably an important part of the defense there as well. Especially at the moment, it's lots of carrier on structure and carrier on carrier action, because they can engage each other from like relatively safe ranges. And so yeah, I think that it could potentially have an impact on the isogen prices. We'll have to wait and see. Right now, the very first tell, of course, is that unlike isogen, which would have continued to go back down and we would have played with 40 ISK at this point, we actually have a little bit of a bump up that we can see in the last 4 or 5 days, which is probably coinciding with the deployment of these new fighters and the information on CC itself. So very good tip here. Take a look at isogen, and buying below 40 ISK might have been a very interesting investment to make. Next up, we also have Noxium that is holding strong. That must be said here. Last week or so, almost 10 days, holding at around 390. Not bad at all after that increase in price. So sellers are coming in at 387, buyers at 377, and compared to the rest of the charts, we are above average. And historically, if you've been playing EVE Online for several years like myself, this is a terrible price. Noxium used to cost like 800 to 1000 ISK, but that was CCP rebalancing the nullsec ores that has completely crashed this down to this trade range. And from that perspective now, with the bottom at 300 and currently selling at 387, Noxium is in a pretty good spot, I would say. Yes, on selling your Noxium if you're looking to unload, or if you're mining actively, then you know, Noxium sources, there are some available in HiSec. They're not a bad idea either. On the nullsec front, let's see what Zydrine is doing. A little bit of a jump up, but then flattening out at the tail end here for the last week or so at around 864. So we're selling at 889 and buyers are coming in at 850. Not too much of a margin, but a slight one. And okay, no breakout. We're definitely still below average for a Zydrine, which I would put 1000 ISK or just below that as the normal price for Zydrine. Megasite though is going to be a different story. Let's see if it works out. No, the chart is not showing that just yet. Oh, and it's the exact opposite of what I was expecting that was actually happening. So sellers on the ticker at the time, there were only sellers coming in at 1266 ISK here, buyers at 1090. But in the meantime, there have been some extra sellers, and they've actually started a lot lower all of a sudden at 1179 and then 1178, and now they're point winding each other from this trade range. It looks like it's gonna stick because the volumes are decent, practically a million. So Megasite is not going to do a double jump, which I expected, you know, on the these sellers which were in play when I was making the ticker. 1266 is actually around here on the charts, and that would have been like a 30% move in 2 weeks. So that would have made these purchases below 1000 ISK really awesome. They're still okay, I would say. You can still sell for almost 1200 ISK, but that increase in price is now being stifled by fresh supply coming in at less than 1200 ISK. That's quite a jump down here in price ranges, so I would say that we could still go either way at this point. But the fact that in the how long have I been going for? 20 minutes that I've now been doing EVE Talk, there have been 3 new sell orders. I thought this one would just get picked up because the volume was so small, but 3 new sell orders coming in competing with this one, I think does mean that Megasite is going to basically bounce off here, just like Zydrine has done right here. It makes more sense as well, of course, considering that the pattern is a bit of a contraction in prices for minerals in general on the more stable nullsec situation now. And then finally we also have a Morphite that actually went up to 12,000 ISK. So here again your investments close to 8,000 ISK were great. And that also needs to have that pullback. So it's the same pullback that we see here in Titanium. maybe a little bit inoxium. That one is actually holding stronger than most of the other ones, and so here for more fight. Great trade opportunity here from 8,000 to 12,000 ISK. That's very nice. Now it's 11,300 ISK. You can definitely still unload your purchases from December, I would say, and the bars are at 10,152, so that margin is probably increasing quite quickly. It's only a couple that are left at more than 10,000 ISK, so we could go back down very quickly with more fight, but you're still in a good place if you're trying to sell your purchases from a couple months ago. Very interesting chart as well. That volatility here definitely tied to NOSC action. This must be said. It's like that in Tritanium as well. It's been like that in Megasite here, not so much. Definitely in Mexalon as well, and it's something to keep in mind. Now, if you're hearing the war drums beat, then be ready to unload. If you have a prolonged period of stability, you know, then probably look to grab some of those minerals. I myself actually sold my Mexalon stock, I would say here, somewhere here at 75 or just slightly above that, on this increase in price, just because it made so much more sense to unload the stocks that I had in Jita, including some of the compressed ores as well. They've been doing quite nicely on this war action, and so I've liquidated at least part of my stocks. Next up we have some PI at 2130. Let's see if there's anything interesting happening here. We'll start as always with the broadcast notes. It was seesawing its way down below average, I must say here. At 2 million ISK on median daily prices. That is not so bad, but on the latest dip here we have a clear increase in volume that increased the price back up well above 2.1 million, I would say. So sellers are at 2.2 million, buyers are at 2.1 million. This is the regular broadcast node price. The fluctuations between 2.0 and 2.2 million basically means that on a day where the sellers are winning out, you're getting that increased price here up to 2.2 million. On the days where it's actually some impatient people that are selling directly to the buyers here, that's when you're getting those dips on. So I would say the average 2.1 million, we're right on average for broadcast nodes, historically speaking. Construction blocks, very interesting. Look at that, didn't expect it, but a slight breakout above 12,000 ISK now. Sellers are coming in at 12,645, definitely a little bit above average. Buyers at 12,000 ISK, right around average on that part. So, okay, first signs of life after basically October, November, which might have been tied in a lot of ways to the introduction of the new refineries here. Construction blocks back slightly above average. You could definitely look to sell these, I would say, if you have the patience for a sell orders. And the buyers here, we need to go down towards 11,000 ISK for a no-brain investment. So I would say have the patience if you're looking to load up on construction blocks. Consumer electronics also has been doing quite nicely, went up to 16,000 ISK, has to give some ground after that, but is still holding decently well. I would say 12,500 is historically speaking the normal average. It's been above that for quite a while during last year, and now we're slowly getting back to that. It's still 13,900 for the sellers, not bad, 13,100 for the buyers as well. So we are above average for consumer electronics. If you can easily produce those, it's still a great time to do so. Coolants, the fuel-related PI is not doing so hot, so we start the year at more than 15,000 ISK. We're ending at 7,500, and unfortunately there is no sign of a turnaround here. 8,900 for the sellers, 8,200 for the buyers. Very, very cheap. Some days we even play with 7,500 as the median daily prices. This is of course very easily produced on gas planets. I produced this on 2 planets, I think, and honestly I may switch it up if, on the other hand, if enough people switch out to different types of PI production facilities, like let's say consumer electronics and construction blocks, because you're getting more bang for your buck, we might eventually stabilize a little bit, but it's very likely that the fuel related PI materials will remain on the cheap side. Certainly for now. Enriched uranium, same situation, staying below 10,000 ISK here, 10,500 for the sellers, 9,600, and it's apparently the buyers that are still winning out most of the time. If we look at the chart, we're staying below 10k on average. So enriched uranium not too hot either because of the fuel situation. Integrity response drones, after dipping quite low to 2.2 million, is now dipping quite low again. That's okay. 2.4 million for the sellers, 2.3 million for the buyers. A normal price for the response drones. Mechanical parts, fuel related, so you get that same 14,000, even a 15,000 high point early last year. Then the introduction of the refineries here, October, November, and then a precipitous drop to less than 10,000 ISK on the lower fuel consumption in general in the game. Nuclear reactors next. This reminds me actually, thinking about that, I'm actually going to write down ICE products for next week, because this could have an impact on those as well. You've got PI, that's one side of what you need for fuel. You also have ICE products, which are the counterpart of fuel. And at one point last year, I actually made a video about it where ICE product and ICE prices went up because there is in EVE Online a limited supply, a limited amount of ICE that can theoretically be mined in a single day. But player activity definitely hasn't reached that cap just yet. But I was thinking of, are we increasing our fuel prices, and will we eventually get into trouble with that? Of course, now with the lower consumption, this gives us a lot more breathing room once again, and I'm actually curious on the impact of all these lower prices like mechanical parts and coolants here, what this will have meant for the ICE prices and ICE product prices. So that's gonna be for next week, because I do have a request that I'm going to honor this week. Next up, nuclear reactors. Bad news on this one. It was a very good suggestion to add this one last year, because we have lots of volatility from 72k up to more than 100,000, then back down to 87,000, but then a peak at 140,000. So there was lots of volatility, lots of trade potential here. Unfortunately, after the spike for the refineries, we went back down, and here now volatility is definitely decreasing, and we're basically stabilizing at around 100,000 ISK. 106,000 for the sellers, 93,000 for the buyers. Not that much of a margin, especially for the nuclear reactors, and so let's hope that volatility can come back here. We'll keep an eye on it, but that's at the moment the situation. Very stable nuclear reactors, right around its average. Robotics next, the first fuel related PI that actually crawls back out of the hole. So we went pretty low to 90,000 ISK, and now we're selling at around 100,000 ISK. Buyers are at 95,000 ISK. So slight comeback in robotics. Good news, I would say. 100,000 ISK is, historically speaking, around average, probably still slightly below average because of the buyers at the moment. Self-harmonizing power cores, very stable at its normal price range, 2.15 million for the sellers, 2.12 million for the buyers, so very narrow margin here as well. If you're looking to make a structure, this is definitely an okay price to do so. If you're looking for an investment, perhaps have the patience. If you want like an investment that's definitely going to pay out, wait at least for the 2.1 millions to go away and buy close to 2 million. If you have lots of patience and you expect even more supply to come in, and you could purchase them for less than 2 million ISK, then you're definitely buying some really cheap self-harmonizing power cores. But this is also, to be honest, the time where you should, I think, look into the potential investments for the next set of structures. So we do know that there are still propaganda towers planned, although we have nothing concrete on them, and then the Stargates themselves will probably require PI stuff as well. So I would say that this is very interesting, and here the self-harmonizing power cores, a little early if you want a sure thing, but definitely on a normal average price, and look at what the spike can potentially get you. So keep that in mind if you're looking to invest in PI. Superconductors next, 12,000 ISK, very flat here as well. Basically on average. Test cultures, a slight increase in price, quite interesting. Currently selling for 9,500 ISK, buyers are at 9,000 ISK. it's a slight increase in price, but it's nothing all too drastic. Previous bottoms here 8,300, selling for 9,500. That's definitely a little bit of ISK that you could make there. I would personally say, considering that the buyers are at 9k, well, it's a decent amount of them. Wait. I would personally wait if I would have had some investments at 8,300 in test cultures. I would wait before selling here, and I would also wait if you were looking to buy these. Next up, we've got the weight-aware mainframes. Very similar pattern, of course. This is the introduction of the refineries with a nice spike up to 3.2 million. Currently selling for 2.3 million. Buyers are also at 2.3 million. I think we can do better if you're looking to invest in weight-aware mainframes, but you can also see that on this chart it's the average price. So BI at the moment, I would say that if you're looking to grab those investments, you do want to keep a very close eye on PI, especially on these advanced PI materials, right? These dips here in broadcast nodes would have been very nice to pick some up and be ready for the eventual, not even introduction, but probably announcement of a new structure coming out. And then the integrity response drones here, a little bit of pressure at the tail end looks interesting. You know, stuff like that is definitely something that you need to do if you want to take a gamble right now. Of course, look at coolants, enriched uraniums, all those fuel related PI materials. That could be very interesting as well. And so it's an interesting market to look at, but at the moment I would say it's mostly about finding the right opportunities to pick up some cheap goods and then wait for the right time to strike and grab your profits. Next up, we've got Tech One ships at 31.45. There we go. Let's go over these. We know that most minerals went up a little bit. At the moment there's a bit of a pullback. What's the impact on Tech One ships? I think it's gonna be almost nothing in net. So here is the Apocalypse, for instance, still struggling at around 130 million after the arms race event. Really, unless there is something happening on the chart, we can go over this pretty quickly. And here, Caracal, there is something happening on the chart. Look at that, we're going up to 10 million ISK. That's quite interesting. 10 million for the sellers, 9 million for the buyers. The Caracal coming back in vogue. 10 million is definitely around an average price. So if you start moving around this trade range, we're back at the average here for the Caracal after a very deep dip. It's a very popular ship. Is this because of the comeback of Tritanium, Megasite coming back, Zydrine also coming back a little bit? We can take a quick look at its industrial requirements on this one. So we've got Tritanium, a decent amount. Pyrite is up a little bit, but already pulling back. Mexilon though is a lot more expensive. We know now that Isogen might stay in the more expensive range as well. Noxium went up substantially, so did Zydrine a little bit, and the Megasite is up as well. And so I think here it is delayed a little bit, right? All of these have actually started going up. Most of them started going up in around early January. Is that true? I think I'm lying here. Let's take a look at Tritanium. Yep, actually, yep, Tritanium went up there. Mexilon started going up in December. And so now, here in the cruiser Caracal market, very popular ship, we are seeing that impact show up in the actual Tech One price. Very interesting development here. I thought we'd have more inertia, but nope. Caracal back at 10 million ISK on the increased prices of all of the needed minerals. The Catalyst is going up a little bit as well to 1.5 million. I would say that that's a pretty good price. The actual sellers though, there's lots of them coming in apparently, and they're driving the price back to less than 1.4 million. Buyers at 1.2. Okay, slight increase in price here as well. Let's see if it shows up on the Drake. Unfortunately, the Drake, this chart is being corrupted, you could say, by the arms race events. We've got this massive dip down to 35 million ISK. Slowly we're edging up, but we're nowhere near the 45 million, which would be the normal average for the Drake. First sellers are slowly coming in that range though. Ferox. I think this was also arms race. No, probably not. And then we see the pattern again. Yeah, exactly. There we go. So no arms race dip. but we do get a 1-year low to less than 45 million ISK. And here at the tail end, look at that, mineral prices starting to show back up, and we're heading back for 50 million. 50 million for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. If you're curious, industry, lots of titanium. Pyrite, not so much. Mixolon up in price, Noxium, Zydrine and Megasite, all of these are up in price, and it's finally showing up in the Tech 1 ship market itself. Very interesting. Hurricane, same thing, slightly up in price here, and at the tail end in the last week or so, we are definitely back up above 45 million, 48 for the sellers, 44 for the buyers. Megatron, Arms Race, Sufferer, does go up above 140 million ISK here. 145 for the sellers, 135 for the buyers. Margin staying long. The battleships will struggle a little bit more, especially those that have had that increased supply due to the arms race event, because also they have very low volumes, and as a result, especially as I've said here, with the arms race supply, it's going to know a lot more inertia, and so it actually shows up first in the cruisers and the battle cruisers. Here is the Oracle, same thing, very sharp increase, in fact, to above average prices. Oracle selling for 80 million ISK, buyers are at 72 million ISK. This is probably a buyout. Yeah, there is a volume increase right here and here as well, spotting that opportunity to buy some for less than 65 million ISK. Next up, we've got the Raven. Arms race, of course, it is a battleship, but we're back at 160 for the Raven. Look at that, 165 for the sellers, 152 for the buyers. So I would say that in a couple of weeks, most of the arms race ships will have been absorbed, at least in the Raven, right? In the Apocalypse, unfortunately not. But it's starting to all settle down, and here now it's finally going to be market forces, and mostly, of course, the mineral market that is going to market forces, so demand, of course, the meta, and mineral prices that are going to have their impact shown clearly across the Tech 1 ship market. The Retriever is still hesitating. We had a sharp increase in price, but fell back just a little bit at 22.5 million for the sellers and less than 20 million for the buyers. The Tempest next, same pattern here, but still not recovered of the arms race event. Thrasher, that was another destroyer that was actually doing really well at almost 1.4 million ISK. Now 1.1 for the sellers, 1 million for the buyers. Basically going back down on I think it was a manipulated bubble, to be honest. The Tornado, though, nicely showing the pattern here again, went down to less than average, less than 60 million in December, stayed there at this really cheap price for a long time, and now we went back up in price, and they're currently selling for 62.5 million, 58.5 for the buyers. This is bound to be the higher mineral cost if you look at what it actually costs. Here again, titanium, Mixolon, Isogen, Zydrine, Megasite, all up in price substantially. The war, of course, might bring this back down again, unfortunately. The Tristan actually had an early increase in price and is now back at 500,000 ISK, 490 for the sellers, 475 for the buyers. So not sure what drove this spike, but it's basically messing with the pattern. The Venture, also a little bit of instability at the tail end here, with a spike up to 300,000 ISK, currently back down to 260. So the frigates are always a little bit tricky. Either they're super stable and there's nothing to see, or there's weird stuff happening, because of course it's so easily manipulated and moved in big volumes, produced in big volumes. So that is why these are a lot trickier to do anything. I don't think you want to trade in Tech 1 frigates though, actively I mean. And here the Vexor showing the same pattern once again, after reaching a 1-year low at 9 million ISK. We're currently back to selling them for 11 million, that's definitely not a bad price, and 9.2 million for the buyers. They still have to some catching up to do. That of course depends now on the mineral market. So pretty large margins in the Caracal as well. Yeah, buyers at 9 million, sellers at 10 million. The other one that went up, the Oracle, 80 million, 72 million for the buyers. So decently large margins between these two. The Hurricane not so much, and the Ferox 45 to 50 million. Yeah, decently large margins. It's going to be the mineral market. If it stays up in price in the minerals, then the buyers will be forced to go up in price. If not, then of course they'll have the luxury of staying where they are, and then the sellers will start to produce ships at cheaper prices, so they'll meet each other that way. It's probably going to be a mix of the two, of course. Very interesting week in the Tech 2 ship market. Next up, let's move on to some Tech 1, sorry. So let's move on to the Tech 2 ship market then at 39.50. And let's see what we can spot here. I'm still looking for the patterns of exactly what's happening, and here, okay, a little bit surprised, but it's in line with what personally I'm hoping for. The Aries dipping back to less than 30 million ISK. 29.8 for the sellers, 27 million for the buyers. I'm hoping that this actually has some momentum and that we're going to seesaw our way to a lower bottom here, closer to 25 million before we go back up in price. That is my personal hope, my expectation as well. I don't think that the difference in output and production potential for the game is down that much. That we have to pay a premium from going from 20 million to like 30 million as the bottom price. I may be wrong on that, but that is personally my expectation, and we keep an eye on all of this to see whether or not I'm right. If I am right, it's very risky to trade at the current prices. If I'm wrong, of course, then this is where you actually do want to make your trades at. The Cerberus also down in price, back down to less than 250 million, but let's keep in mind previous bottom here 230 million, so we still have a ways to go for my theory to prove itself. Cerberus currently selling for 53 million ISK. The Claw again also under pressure, heading back to 30 million here, 31 for the sellers at the moment, 28.7 for the buyers. The Crow, what's that one doing? That one is proving me wrong, going back to staying above 30 million basically. 33 for the sellers, 29 for the buyers. The Crusader flat below 30 million. This is, for instance, one that is giving me a little bit of hope here, because that's going to be continued pressure on any fresh supply. And you can see here below 30 million, another 10, another 20, then they're competing at 28 million with 60, with 39. Potentially here we could drive the price back down. The Heretic though, exact opposite, 1 year high point, selling for 90 million ISK, and it's only 6 on the market, 70 million for the buyers. Smaller ships, the pattern is going to show up there first because they're more easily produced, and then the larger we go, the trickier it's going to remain. The Hound next though, look at that, nice spike up to 50 million on the Gnostic action of course, but then straight back down to less than 30 million ISK. Sellers in fact coming in at 29 million now, buyers at 27 million. It's my hope that this can actually have some more momentum. The Ishtar next, also down in price substantially, selling now for 262. Manticore, same thing. I'm hoping that we can break through the 30 million on the Manticore. That would be really good news. Selling still for 33 million. It's a little bit too much. Supply though is quite decent. Full front page in the last 24 hours. And so that's close to definitely more than 100 Manticores. 200 probably won't make that. But just look at that. Let's hope that it has more momentum so that we can indeed trade at lower ranges. Nemesis trying to give back as well, but playing with 30 million. First one coming in at 28 million though. So this is what I want to see more of. Buyers though also at 28 million. Pontifex starting to stabilize at this point. 84 million for the sellers, 71 million for the buyers. Very large margin. It is a command destroyer, so we expect that to basically have lag behind the actual pattern for Tech 2, which will show up in the smaller frigates first. Purifier, same thing here. Dive back down to 30 million ISK. Buyers at 27 million ISK. And so the question is, do we have momentum to go even lower than that at this point? That's the real question. Raptor, same thing, actually dipping to 29 million. Yeah, 29.6 for the sellers, 28 for the first buyer though. He's spoiling the party here with 99 buy orders at 28 million units. Saber finally going down in price a little bit as well. 70 million for the sellers, 66 million for the buyers. This is what actually also gives me a little bit of hope. Is that first destroyer here as well, with buyers at 66 million. That is substantially below everything that's been happening since the introduction of the refineries. Stiletto next, same patterns, a sharp drop off, currently selling for 30 million, but look at the amounts here. All of this in the last 24 hours with 40, 30, another 15 here. It's a decent amount of supply. The Stork, the Command Destroyer, so that's not great, still at a 1-year high point, selling for 87 million ISK. And then the Tyrannus is selling for less than 30 million. And how is the fresh supply here? Couple here, and then less than 30 million. First sellers coming in at less than 30 million. Okay, very interesting. The general pattern is clear, right? On the deployment of the Imperium and Gnostic activity, we went back up to 35 million. We are now back down on the lower period. People have been unloading whatever they have produced or they turned out they didn't need, and so we're back at 30 million for the frigates. Next week, I would say very crucial to determine what's going to happen with the Tech 2 market. I still think that we have potential to go lower, to actually have lower trade ranges. If I'm wrong, then of course many of these with buyers at 27 million are in buy order territory at the moment. So that is the gamble that we need to take, the pattern that we need to figure out, and we're going to continue to do that. Interesting week though here in the Tech 2 market as well, with that sharp pullback across practically all frigates. Next up, Tech 3 ships at 46 minutes. 0-0. As always, we'll start with the destroyers and the Confessor, which knew some nice instability, some lovely volatility that would have been great for trading, right? If you can buy at 35 million, then sell at 55, buy again at 40, sell again at 60, buy again at 40, sell again at 60. All of that in the last 6 months, not bad at all. Unfortunately, we can see that the peaks have been, the high points have been going down, the low points have been going up, and we're settling at 45 million ISK. And here now 108 at 49 million and 228 at 45 million is going to make it tricky to regain volatility here. So unfortunately, my fear, I expressed it last week as well, is that some other ships, Tech 3 ships, were really oversupplied already. If production starts to move towards the other ones, everything is going to stabilize. Next up here, we get the Hecate, went up to almost 55 million ISK. Yeah, 55 for the sellers, 45 for the buyers, so there's a decent margin here. And basically it's 119 at 55 million right here. The question is, of course, is there room for this to go up, or will we see after the Confessor having 228 supply coming in here? Are we going to see something similar happen with the Hecate, with a couple of hundreds coming in, driving the price back to that 45 million trade range? That's my expectation, to be honest. The Jackdaw, that's of course the Imperium deployment. It's a doctrine that's used a lot in Gnostic. 49 million for the sellers, 55 for the buyers. Again, you can see though decent supply here as well of these Jackdaws. Potentially, it's a second destroyer though that needs to be massively supplied in order to bring the price back down to the Confessor range. And then finally we've got the Zvepel that also went up to more than 50 million, but already sellers coming in at 50, buyers are at 49 million. So it's interesting here. That's not even that many Zvepels, nothing all too crazy. I would say it could still go either way, and then the Confessor becomes the interesting one, because the Confessor is now selling for 45 million, buyers are at 42 million, way below all the other tactical destroyers. There is massive supply, but if producers are watching this market, what are you going to produce at the moment? You are of course going to produce Hecates, you are going to produce Jackdaws, you are going to produce Zvepels in maybe fewer numbers, but it also has fewer lower supply here. So the Confessor might actually be in a buy opportunity if the volatility pattern does show up, and I would say potentially it could still happen. I personally do fear that more supply is going to start to come to this market and will stifle volatility. But looking at the destroyer market in and of itself right now, I would say the Confessor is primed for another spike up here, and trying to pick, maybe it goes up at 45 million here, at least a couple of them, or risking a buy order very close to that could actually be a very good idea. So we'll see in the upcoming weeks. Quite interesting again. Next up, the Legion stabilizing at less than 150, selling for 143 million, 133 for the buyers, 10 million margin. Oh, I didn't look at availability, I really should. Nothing too crazy here. The 200 units at 145 though is going to basically put a nail in volatility potentially. Loki next, actually, that one going up in price a little bit again to more than 200 million ISK, selling for 210, but with 400 units of those here, 193 for the buyers. Proteus, finally some stability here in the Proteus, 140 million for the sellers, 131 for the buyers, and that is 500 units here in 2 sell orders from 3 days ago. Is going to continue the stability. And then finally we have the Tengu, which if you looked at the ticker, you know that one is basically going nowhere on that oversupply situation. So 124, 116, 231 units, all of them being sold at 145 million, couple point wanting each other just below that. And this is what I'm actually afraid of, is that the Tengu has been doing so for how long now? 1.5 months, almost 2 months at this current rate. And it's just the volumes are so abysmal for the ship. 120, 134 a day, still that's not that bad, but it's just not going anywhere. And so now what's been happening in the Tengu is also showing up in the Proteus, and right, with these sell orders right here. So we might be in for quite a couple of weeks of Protea at 140 million period. And then of course, you know, if you can't be making Tengus, if you can't be making Protea, then maybe you're moving on to the Legion next. If we start to see here again 200 units at 145 million, it's actually competing to go below that. And then of course the Loki though is the one that is still potentially super volatile, that but it has crazy numbers starting to show up here as well. So what are you going to do then, other than to, well, maybe make some of these destroyers and stabilize those markets? So if you look at the destroyers themselves, Confessor looks very interesting. If you look at the entire Tech Tree market, I am still seeing that specter of oversupply causing lower prices, but also extremely stable prices is still looming on the horizon for me. And then finally, for the extra product at 52 minutes, the request was for the Gnosis. I'm going to honor that. Let's take a look at it. The actual request was to add the Gnosis to the Tech 1 roster. I don't agree with this, because the Gnosis is a little bit different. A Gnosis blueprint, for instance, there's only BPCs that exist, and the cost is 1 tritanium. So this is a site of conscious thought ship. It's something completely different from the general Tech 1 market. So I don't agree adding it in the lineup, but I definitely don't mind taking a look at it. Selling for 53.6 million ISK. It's a great ship that alpha characters can very easily fly, if I'm not mistaken. The requirements: Spaceship Command 1, that's all you need. And as a result here, because of course you can't infinitely make Gnosis in the game, we are up in price towards a high point up of almost 55 million ISK here. It's not a 1-year high point, that's more than 60 million right here in September. Alpha clone related, probably. But for the year difference here, we start at less than 40 million ISK and we're currently selling at 53.6 million ISK. That's definitely a nice increase in price. Compare that to the regular Tech 1 ships. I should not have deleted that, but compare that to something like a Drake, which is also a battlecruiser, of course. Start at 45 million and we actually come from a 1-year low point. Ferox is also a battlecruiser, starts at above 50 million. Here we just come from a really bad period at less than 45 million ISK. So compared to that, of course, the Gnosis is doing really well, but the big difference is you can't just get a BPO of the Gnosis. You've got BPCs lying around. I still have potentially lots of them lying around as well. I've got several BPCs that I could make Gnosis from, a single tritanium from. And as a result, it shows this different pattern from the other Tech 1 chips, which is why I'm not going to take it into the lineup. At the moment though, in the last month or so, a nice increase in price from 45 million to 53 million. And so if you're looking to sell, if you're actively trading those, I would say that we are in a seller's market at the moment, where you can make some ISK on the Gnosis as well. And so for next week, I've got the ice products coming. If you have suggestions though, definitely feel free to post those in the comments. For now, thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys next time.